Welcome to Suncoast in Depth. I'm Pastor Brett Watson, one of the teaching pastors at Suncoast Community Church, and I'm continuing here today our series called Religion, the Human Quest to Reconnect. And this session will be on Buddhism. So far, we've talked about, and there are videos for, the history of religion, like where did religious thought originate from, at least theories about that, and all of which was super fascinating, reaching as far back as our nearest human relatives to see where religious thinking and beliefs might have sprung from. The second one was an introduction to and the history of Hinduism, and the third one that's already posted is an introduction to American Hinduism, how certain Hindu gurus have impacted the United States and its religious culture. This one is going to be about a religion that originates out of Hinduism, but out of what's known as the Renunciation period, and it is Buddhism. It's the best known. We could look at a number of different renunciate religions that sprang out of Hinduism, rather. But because Buddhism is the best known of those in the West, I've chosen to kind of focus there. So what we're going to look at here is who the Buddha is, and then we'll be looking at what his beliefs were, what he taught, what his followers continue to teach. So Buddhism is, and by the way, I want to give credit where it's due. The artwork and the content of the religious channel known as Cogito, fantastic channel, I think, and I highly recommend it. In fact, I'll put a link in the description so you can watch the one on Buddhism. So a lot of this content and the inspiration for the artwork that I'm using comes from this guy who is a great speaker. He's got a cool, I think, English accent. It's different though, and moreover, he's just a funny guy. So highly recommend his stuff. So Buddhism is known as a religion of acceptance, acceptance of reality for what it is, and the peace that ensues from that acceptance, and it's known for bald monks. It originates out of northeastern India, a region called Nepal. The Buddha himself was born around, there's some speculation about this and no exact numbers, but anywhere from 560 to 480 BCE. So Jesus is considered to have been born 4 BCE. And so you can see that there's about 500 years. The Buddha comes on the scene about 500 years before Jesus of Nazareth. And that's just for our reference point as Westerners, or at least the class that I teach on Thursday nights. It's interesting that there were a great number of renunciate religions that sprang out of a renouncing of Vedic Hinduism and the beliefs around the caste system and beliefs about the inevitability of reincarnation. These renunciant religions sought a way out of the endless cycle of reincarnation, samsara. And that is true in Buddhism as well. So it is one of the renunciate religions. It's a pretty large religion. Buddhism claims around 500 to 530 million believers, most of which are concentrated in the Far East at this point. So it fell out of popularity in its place of origin, but it had spread into the Far East where it still and continues to grow. So if you're not from that region of the world, then it's very likely that you know very little about Buddhism. And that's why I'm doing this class, because for my own personal interest, Buddhism shares a lot in common with all religions, really, but it shares a lot in common with Christianity, which is where my specialization is. So I just find it to be a really interesting religion / philosophy. It's called both because Buddhism in its oldest form doesn't really acknowledge the gods as anything other than very powerful beings who are stuck in the same cycle of reincarnation. So they're not aspiring to be in connection necessarily with an individual all supreme being. And that's why many refer to it as a philosophy. They do believe in gods, but they're just being stuck in reincarnation like the rest of us. So who is the Buddha? That's what I want to fixate on here. The Buddha is, first of all, a title. His name is not Buddha. The Buddha is very similar to the title of the Christ or Mashiach, Messiah. It is anointed one or enlightened one or awakened one is probably even a more direct translation. And so the Buddha is a title for a man named Siddartha Gautama. Siddartha Gautama was born to, as the story tells us, to a ruler in Nepal, a very powerful ruler, and his mother. And so this again was around 560 to 480 BCE, northeastern India, Nepal. There's an interesting story in the Mahayana tradition, which we'll break down in a while. But the birth narrative of the Buddha is a really interesting one. His mother had a dream that's considered to be prophetic, where she saw a white elephant, a symbol of divinity in Hinduism, enter her side. She becomes pregnant with Siddartha, and as was tradition, as it is in many ancient cultures, she would go and have the child at her family's estate. So her family would be surrounding her. And then on the way to her family's estate, she starts to go into labor. She comes under the shade of a tree. She reaches up and holds herself up with her right hand, which I'm sure has symbolism that I haven't researched, but I'm going to. Right hand, because they specify that. So whenever you hear these myths or read these myths, you can bet that when there are weird little details that are pointed out, like grasping it with her right hand, there's probably some hidden meaning there. In any case, she grabs this tree branch and she gives birth to Siddartha. The story tells us that as he's born, he stands up and he takes 7 steps, represented in this picture that I'm showing you, by 7 lotus flowers, which is a symbol of eternal life. And so he takes these 7 steps, and on the 7th step, he declares to all of the gods and demons and other enlightened beings surrounding his birth that he is the awakened one. He is the Buddha. So the infant Buddha could speak, according to the story. I just think it's a cool story. And it's as close to a virgin birth as you can get without actually calling it that, which is another common thing that you find in the birth narratives of famous teachers, as we do with Jesus. So he's born to this rich couple, this king, if you will, and so he's a prince. His father receives a visitation from a guru, a Hindu holy man, and that holy man tells him that his son is destined to become either a great ruler of men or a Buddha or a holy man. His dad freaks out. There's no son of mine's going to be a holy man. He wants him to be a ruler like he is. So he wants him to inherit the throne. And so he sets himself to the task of making sure, to the best of his ability, that Siddartha becomes a ruler. And the way that he goes about this is not, it's very typical among parents, even today, right? His dad wants to shield him from everything that that life can cause suffering through, right? He even makes sure that Siddartha is never subjected to old age, as best he can, so he never has any old people visiting the palace. He keeps Siddartha pinned in the palace. He surrounds him with youthful, good-looking women, all of the pleasures that his royal status can afford, and anyone that on his staff that he thought was too ugly, sick, or too old, he fired them, and they were out. So he's doing his best to hide life from Siddartha. Sound like any parents you know? He's the ultimate helicopter dad. So Siddartha's enjoying this life, but like most parental plans, despite the best of intentions, this one fails. Siddartha is surrounded by all this pleasure, but he still finds himself very unsatisfied in his state of royal spoiledness. So he begins to wonder about things. He finally gets permission to leave the palace. He's age 29 at this point in the story. And he gets his servant, Chana, to take him out on a tour of the city. And while he's out on this particular tour, he encounters an old man. He's like, what the hell's wrong with that guy? And Chana explains to him, well, he's old. This happens to everybody. What? He freaks out. I think on the same visit, he encounters also a sick man. What's wrong with that guy? Oh, he's sick. Sickness affects everybody. What? He freaks out. Then, on another visit, he sees this funeral procession, and they're carrying this corpse. He's like, what's wrong with that guy? He's dead. Happens to everybody. What the? He's freaking out. Big time freaking out. And this experience, or these experiences, send him spiraling into this existential dread, if you will. He's thinking, what's the point of doing anything in life if all of it leads to old age and pain and suffering, sickness, disease, and then eventual death? What's the point of all this? Not unlike the existential dread that many of us have run into during our lives. What is the point of this life? Why is there so much suffering in it? But then, on another visit to the city, so he doesn't give up on life, he decides to visit the city again. Chana takes him out, and he sees a holy man. And the holy man looks extremely content and happy, even though he has nothing. And so Siddartha's weighing things out. I have everything. I'm not happy and content. That guy seems very happy and content. What's going on? So the long and short of it is he makes a decision that he's going to leave his life of pleasure. He's going to leave his beautiful wife and his child to go out and find the answers that he needs to the suffering of humanity. And so he tells Chana, I'm out. Tell the family I'm becoming a holy man. So what happens from there is he joins, he learns from a number of famous Hindu teachers, and he debates with them. There are many stories about the debates and how Siddartha silences them all, despite their greatness as teachers. And then he finally ends up in an ashram where the monks practice severe asceticism, where they just abuse the body and deny all the senses of the body and spend many, many hours in fasting and meditation. He fasts for so long that the only thing that he eats, according to the story, are the seeds that blow into his lap occasionally. And he almost dies. And he realizes as he is contemplating all of this that his starvation is not allowing him to do the meditation work. So his suffering is keeping him from being able to figure out answers about suffering. He's like, what is the point of all this? He's still unsatisfied. He hasn't come any nearer to his answers than he was before in his palace of pleasure. So he keeps meditating, and then all of a sudden something clicks. And he realizes that the answers aren't found in the pleasure palace, in his life of gluttony and greed and pleasure, hedonism. And it's not found in the extreme asceticism of his hermit's life either. He realizes that there is what he calls a middle way. That's where the answers will be found. The understanding that he is so hungry for, the answers to human suffering and the meaning of life, if you will. The middle way, he realizes, also involves some important truths that need to be embraced and practices that need to be enacted. The Four Noble Truths are the thoughts, the important realizations and acceptance of that reality in the mind, and then the Eightfold Path is the practice that leads to the answer, enlightenment, understanding of reality. So, as the story goes, he, on the verge of starvation, death, a milkmaid approaches him and starts to feed him rice and milk. And his health is slowly restored. And once it is restored, he decides, I am now going to go and commit myself to meditating beneath this Bodhi tree. A tree, by the way, that they claim still exists. You can see pictures of it online. Huge, huge tree, banyan tree. So anyway, he commits himself to meditating till he finds the answers that he's looking for. And so he begins his meditative journey again. And while he is meditating, he's confronted by a demon. This should sound familiar to Christians, right? Because there's a similar story in the Gospels about the temptation of Jesus in the desert by Satan, the Satan. So the demon, Mara, confronts the Buddha as he's meditating and begins to assail him with all kinds of worldly temptations, which he had already had in the pleasure palace, but also the fears that he's encountered concerning old age, sickness, and death. And as he is firing all of these temptations at the Buddha, they're like arrows that turn into lotus petals and just fall to the ground. Or some stories have it's like butterflies. They turn into butterflies and just float around. And so the Buddha, or Siddartha at this point, is able to overcome all of these temptations that Mara throws at him. And so during this deep state of contemplation, he connects suffering with desire. This doesn't mean, I can hear some critics that I've talked to that want to oversimplify this in their critique of Buddhism. It doesn't mean desire for anything. It means desire centered on self is a better way to put it. So all of the desires that we have that come out of unmet expectations, out of envy, jealousy. We see things that other people have and we want it, and we see what we do have and we want something more. Out of evil, the desire to exploit others. All of these are the things that create the desires that have to be purged. And so this can be accomplished, he decides, again, by the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So this is when he becomes the Buddha. Siddartha is now the awakened one. From here, he decides that since he knows the way to enlightenment and freedom, therefore, from the endless cycle of reincarnation, he needs to share that with everyone. He struggles, actually, with whether this can even be done, because he knows by his experience with most people that they're just too distracted, again, by their desires to just live out their normal life. They have families and so on. There's all kinds of things that are pulling their attention away from this all-important issue, the escape from reincarnation and the suffering of life. And so he's visited then by Brahma, a Hindu god, and says, you must do this thing. You must share what you have come to know as best you can. And so that's when he decides he's going to go out and spread his gospel, so to speak, his good news that you can escape the endless cycle of reincarnation and the suffering that comes from life. And that kind of summarizes who the Buddha is in his life. Way oversimplified, but for the sake of time, that's what I'm going to share. There are a lot of fascinating stories that you can read besides about his life and his debates and teachings and philosophy and so on. And I recommend you do that on your own. But anyway, thanks for watching. And in the next one, we'll be talking about what those beliefs were, a breakdown of those basic beliefs, and how he recommended practicing them.